I don't know who I am anymore. Trying, trying, trying. I thought of how unpleasant it was to be locked out, and I thought how it was perhaps worse to be locked in. I'm sorry. I love you all. I'm sorry. It was a beautiful January evening in Philadelphia. Madison Holleran, a 19-year-old freshman track star at the University of Pennsylvania, took a glowing picture of Rittenhouse Square, purchased gifts for her family, and then tragically took her own life when she jumped from the top of a parking garage. Madison's story affected family, friends, and fellow athletes across the nation. Probably the most upsetting part of Madison's story is that this is something that should be an exception, yet it is increasingly becoming the norm across college campuses nationwide. Students are becoming overwhelmed, depressed, and suicidal at alarming rates. Researchers have recently become very interested in these statistics surrounding suicide and mental health. Scholars at the Center for Collegiate Mental Health at the Pennsylvania State University have been tracking these trends on universities nationwide for the past couple of years. There's a few I want to highlight with you today from their 2017 annual report. First, the incident of things like cutting, which involves hitting, burning, scratching, has gone up almost 5% in just a 5-year span. In addition, college students reporting serious thoughts of suicide has also gone up almost 5% in just 5 years. And finally, the rate of students who have actually made a suicide attempt has gone up from 8 to 10% in a 5-year span. Unfortunately, these statistics face the harsh reality facing college campuses today. There is a mental health epidemic, and it does not seem to be slowing down. So what does happen when a student expresses suicidality? Today, I want to share with you the story of WP. His story was published in The New Yorker in 2014. He used his initials in order to protect his identity. WP was a freshman at Princeton University. He was hospitalized for 3 days following a suicide attempt. Upon being released from the hospital, WP was notified by campus administrators that he would no longer be allowed to return to his dorm or attend any classes. WP took 2 weeks off from school, and when he was feeling better, he appealed his leave of absence, stating that he was doing much better, and just because he was struggling with depression shouldn't deny him his right to an education. In addition, WP's psychiatrist wrote on his behalf, stating that he was doing much better and he should in fact be allowed back in school because school can be a protective factor for many students struggling with mental illness, as an important part of recovery is having a sense of purpose, which can be provided through things like education. Princeton denied his appeal. WP was then forced to take a year off from school and ended up filing a lawsuit. In his lawsuit, he explains that in the year off and how it was so detrimental to his recovery. He had constant stress, anxiety, and further depression about his embarrassment and shame around his situation. Julie Bazelon, WP's attorney from the Center for Mental Health Law, explains, I really just don't think universities understand what mental health disabilities are and that they're chronic illnesses. It's not uncommon for an individual to have to be hospitalized for a few short days at a time, yet that does not mean that they are incompetent or not capable of being a strong student. So what causes these barriers on college campuses to supporting students with mental health? Well, I think one of the biggest barriers is liability. And as WP shares in the article in The New Yorker, he says, I began to feel as though the university was less concerned with protecting my health than they were with avoiding liability and upholding their reputation. In addition to liability, I think an issue of a lack of education and training, as well as a lack of resources, contributes to this mental health epidemic. But I'm here today to offer up a few suggestions. First, the issue of liability. So one awesome thing about living in America is that we have something called insurance. So if universities are really concerned with serving individuals with mental illness and thoughts of suicidality, why don't we just increase liability insurance? And I'm sure to you all, that sounds like a very daunting task. But what if we just asked students to pay $5 extra in tuition each year to blanket cover all of the students at university so that they could get the mental health support they need? I bet if I were to ask each and every one of you in this audience if you would be willing to take a friend, coworker, student, you name it, out to lunch or coffee because they're struggling with mental illness, you would say yes. So I don't think asking individuals to pay an extra $5 a year just to make sure themselves and their fellow students are covered if they do ever face a mental illness would be a big issue. In fact, I think it would be a very simple and viable solution to breaking down the barriers surrounding mental health issues on college campuses. Second, the issue of a lack of education and training. I think another big factor that comes into play here is that many faculty and staff on college campuses are actually not prepared or don't know what to do if they do have a student that expresses suicidality or a mental health issue. However, in recent years, many faculty and staff across the nation have been required to take trainings in things like sexual assault or even safety planning in case there is an active shooter on campus. However, to my knowledge, faculty and staff are not required to take any mental health or suicide prevention training. What if we simply required all faculty and staff to spend 1 hour each year just taking a training around suicide prevention and mental health? While this may seem like a relatively small thing to do, it could actually result in saving a life. Finally, the issue of a lack of resources. So I'm sure many universities feel overwhelmed and feel that they're not prepared and don't have enough counselors or therapists to support all the students with mental health issues. But what if we got creative with this? For example, here at UD, we have a Department of Psychology, a Department of Human Development and Family Sciences, and within these programs, we have a lot of students who are actually interested in doing clinical work. For example, in the Human Services Department. What if we took a core class in each of these programs and required students to be trained on the crisis text line, and then required them to provide 1 hour a week as part of their course grade to working this crisis text line? This would both be a great opportunity for students interested in going into the clinical field. It would also increase awareness about the crisis text line in general, and most importantly, it would bolster the amount of mental health support that we can offer to students. While these 3 things alone might not solve the mental health epidemic, it would certainly be a step in the right direction, and most importantly, might end up saving a couple lives. Finally, I want to talk to you all about this idea of becoming a gatekeeper. Now, many of you in the audience coming from a human sciences background are probably a bit confused, because typically in the human sciences field, gatekeeping has a very negative connotation. For example, in the fathering literature, it's typically seen as a mother controlling access to her children, and this comes up a lot in custody cases. However, what if we spin this negative connotation and think of it more in a positive light? So for example, what if we looked at a gatekeeper as more of a guardian angel than a warden? In fact, this is what actually happens in the mental health field and the field of suicide prevention, and therefore you'll see a lot of gatekeeper trainings in the field. Because in the field of suicide prevention, a gatekeeper is seen as a positive thing. It's seen as someone who actually connects an individual to supports and services and helps them through a difficult time. So I would encourage each of you to lend a hand, support someone, to become a guardian angel. Before I end this talk, I would like to have a moment of silence for everyone struggling with mental illness and for the lives we've lost here at UD, like Connor Mullen, as well as people we've lost across campuses nationwide to suicide. In closing, as Madison Holleran said in her final words, and perhaps I thought how it was worse to be locked in. So be a gatekeeper, be someone who's there to unlock the door for someone who's struggling. Thank you.